Hello again, everyone. The final item of business is a statement by Michael Matheson on transport. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Michael Matheson for up to 10 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Parliament with an update on the Government's transport transition planning as we move through Phase 3 of the route map and our COVID-19 lockdown exit strategy. May I start once again with my thanks to our dedicated transport workers for their professionalism and commitment, and to the people of Scotland for the prudent and conscientious approach they have adopted in their travel behaviours during this pandemic. Presiding Officer, the overarching focus of our work throughout this crisis has been to provide a safe transport system that meets the needs of the country and keeps Scotland moving whilst continuing to suppress the COVID-19 virus. That focus is why we have provided unprecedented levels of financial support for our public transport system to assist it in continuing to operate. We committed a total of £321 million to support all modes of public transport. That includes supporting our rail network with £231 million, £9 million for light rail, and the bus industry with additional funding of £6.7 million to support increased service levels. And we provided financial support to our ferry operators through existing contract mechanisms. There has also been a tremendous response from local authorities and other public bodies to the £30 million Spaces for People Fund. I'm pleased to report the ambitious programme has resulted in exceeding the £30 million fund. However, we've identified an additional £3.4 million from the active travel bit and are considering options to purchase more funds to ensure all eligible applicants can be funded. Presiding Officer, as we now look forward, let me outline some of the aspects of our transition plan in Phase 3. It allows many more people to return to work and to travel for tourism and hospitality. Whilst there is a degree of uncertainty in any analysis, it suggests that could increase from around 200,000 trips a day, as we're currently experiencing, up to around 1 million across all modes. With 2 metre physical distancing, there is potential for there to be overcrowding on public transport, particularly at peak times. So last week, an exception was granted to enable the public transport sector to operate reduced physical distancing of 1 metre, provided that appropriate mitigation measures are in place and as a result of a risk assessment being carried out by the operator. This will to increase capacity. Presiding Officer, given the reliance on public transport, we continue to work with local authorities in the Glasgow and Edinburgh City region to help them develop transportation plans for the months ahead, as well as engaging closely with island authorities who rely heavily on our ferry network. We are still encouraging people to stay local for work, to continue to work from home if possible, to walk, wheel or cycle, and to continue to adhere to all travel guidelines. So in this context, we are working with a range of transport providers to deliver a demand management programme as we move the phases of the route map. This work is based on analysis of transport trend data and will allow us to tailor our message to specific target groups. To deliver these messages to the travelling public, we are working with partners such as Traffic Scotland, Line Scotland, ScotRail, bus, ferry operators and active travel partners to ensure a coordinated approach. We're encouraging people to make use of live information from the network to help people plan their journeys and to avoid busy times and services. And focusing on the busiest areas, we are engaging with employers, as I did on a recent visit to Scottish Power, to offer travel demand workshops to enable them to better support their employees as they return to work. Presiding Officer, I've spoken about our funding support for bus operators. Today, and in the context of our regional planning, I am announcing a new Bus Priority Rapid Deployment Fund, which will support local authorities in responding to the challenges of reduced public transport capacity and increase the effectiveness of the capacity that is available. This £10 million will have light touch processes to allow local authorities working with bus operators to put measures in place quickly where demand could potentially exceed capacity and congestion could reduce this. Bus Priority can address the issues of congestion, making bus journeys more attractive, and that in turn leads to mode shift for car and assists us in cabin safety and also improving air quality. We all want our air quality to be the best it can be, but for the oldest and the youngest society and those with the existing health conditions, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, air quality remains an issue. It's crucial that we have LEZs in place, introduced in our 4 biggest cities as quickly as possible. £8.8 million of funding is being made available for bus and coach operators to reduce emissions through the Bus Emissions Abatement Retrofit scheme. It has improved grant thresholds of operators. This fund will continue to help support our ambition to protect public health and to improve our air quality. The easing of restrictions in Phase 3 is equally applicable to travel to and within our islands. I know there have been concerns around the capacity restrictions that create challenges on particularly busy routes such as Arm and Mill. Today I'm pleased to report that there has been positive progress in recent weeks where, working with local authorities and key ferry stakeholder groups and Circle Northlink, we've taken steps to increase capacity to help support island economies and offer the opportunity for travel to and from the mainland. This has included CalMac bringing forward the move to 2 vessel services on key routes, or putting an additional or larger vessel on particular routes, and Circlink increasing sailings across the Peninsula to 3 per day. During the transition period, it has been necessary to closely manage the booking to balance the needs of all travellers. I am, however, pleased to confirm that both CalMac and Link services will be available to book as normal for the remainder of the season. COVID-19 has had a massive impact on the aviation industry globally. As demand for travel has collapsed, airlines have had to reduce their operations, and that in turn has had a knock-on effect for airports, handling companies, and many auxiliary services. As travel restrictions ease, airlines are slowly restarting routes. 2019, Scotland was better connected to the rest of the world than ever before, and our ambition is to help Scotland's airports restore connectivity quickly as possible. This, as I say, is a problem for the aviation industry worldwide, and Scotland is one part of the industry where competition is tense. We have a strong track record in helping airports improve connectivity and a solid base on which to build. We will continue to focus on routes that are important for business and tourism, with a particular focus on winning back key North America for summer 2021. We'll do all we can to help airports return to normal levels of operations. as that will lead to reinstatement of many of the jobs that have been lost as a result of the pandemic. Presiding Officer, as we transition into and through phase, our aim is to build confidence in the safety and the security of our public transport system, both for the people of Scotland and visitors, and to support recovery.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I say to you that the sound was very, very bad. So it may be that members didn't pick up everything that was said. So please recognise that, that in some of the questions that may be very apparent. You're also not looking too great, Cabinet Secretary, so we're going to turn off your camera and see if that improves the sound any. I will go to question number 1, is Dean Lockhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And let me thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance copy of his statement, and also add my thanks to the hard work of transport workers across Scotland that have helped keep the country moving during the crisis. With schools due to start back in less than 4 weeks' time, a number of parents have voiced concerns that there might be insufficient capacity in the school bus network and other forms of school transport to take their children back to school. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to provide his personal assurance today to parents that there will be sufficient capacity to take children back to school when schools reopen, and that no children will be left behind? In relation to the ongoing quarantine measures imposed on travel to Spain, thousands of Scottish holidaymakers have unfortunately had their holiday plans cancelled due to the Scottish Government's decision to impose these measures, and travel bodies such as the Scottish Tourism Alliance have also described this decision as a blow to inward bound tourism from Spain. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to explain why the decision was made to introduce quarantine for the whole of Spain, making no allowance for areas there with low coronavirus levels? And can he also provide an update on when these quarantine measures will be reviewed? And finally, with respect to the aviation sector, the Cabinet Secretary touched on, in correspondence between myself and the Cabinet Secretary, he said that it might take 5 years for connectivity in Scotland to recover to pre-COVID levels. Given the scale of this disruption, can the Cabinet Secretary outline the specific measures he's taking to make sure that connectivity in Scotland can recover before that 5-year period?
Michael Matheson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let me deal with each of those issues in turn and start, first of all, with the issue around school transport. I don't know if Mr Lockhart is aware, but the lead responsibility on school transport sits with the education portfolio, and my colleague, the Deputy First Minister, is taking forward a body of work to look at issues relating to school transport for when the schools return in August. You'll also be aware the Deputy First Minister has indicated that the advice that's been provided by the Scottish Government scientific advisors, that they are providing some specific advice in relation to school transport and not having to have a requirement for physical distancing on school transport itself. My officials are engaged with colleagues within the education sector to offer any support we can, but I've got no doubt that the First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Education will set out in more detail how some of the issues around school transport will be addressed prior to schools returning. In relation to the matter regarding Spain and the decision to implement quarantine restrictions for those travelling to Spain, that was based upon the data which was available from Spanish authorities on the prevalence of COVID-19 in Spain as a whole. We have subsequently asked them for further details in relation to regional variations in order to consider whether a regional approach could to lifting those restrictions. That's a matter which has been actively considered at the present time, but it is dependent upon accurate data being provided by the Spanish authorities in order for that assessment to be undertaken. That any decision in relation to quarantine matters will be made on the basis of public health grounds, to ensure that we protect public health in Scotland as effectively as possible. And on his final point in relation to aviation sector in Scotland is being impacted by the worldwide impact in the downturn of aviation. The challenges which we'll face is increasing level of competition for direct routes, with fewer aircraft being available for these particular routes as airlines downsize their overall size of operations. And therefore, it could take several years for us to recover some of the loss in capacity which is being experienced within the aviation industry overall. We have a very strong track record in attracting direct routes into Scotland and also into global hubs. And we will continue to work in support of the aviation sector and wider tourist sector and the economic sector to look at how we can rebuild activity in the months and years ahead. And given the very strong track record we have in this area, I'm determined to make sure that we drive that forward in the weeks and months ahead, which is why we're engaging with the aviation sector on how we can best go about doing that as we move forward.
Colin Smith.
Thank you, President Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the advance sight of his statement and also add my thanks to Scotland's transport workers. The government's own travel trend data shows that while cab use is up by a third since last year, the use of buses, rail, ferries, air journeys are all down massively, and even walking and cycling levels have fallen from their already low levels. So it's disappointing the Cabinet Secretary hasn't committed any extra overall funding for active travel, merely cut funding for permanent active travel schemes to pay for temporary ones. And I'm disappointed there's still no sectoral help for civil aviation, despite the Fraser Allender Institute report for Unite the Union warning that 5,000 jobs are at risk. But can I ask the Cabinet Secretary about the funding he did announce today, primarily for bus services? No conditions were attached to previous funding, so across Scotland we're seeing bus routes being axed by bus operators. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore tell us specifically what conditions will be attached to this funding announced today for buses to stop operators cutting services? Can he also tell us whether this funding can be used by local councils for school transport, specifically not the school transport buses, but those service buses that are used by thousands of Scotland's school kids to get to school who are entitled to free travel, who don't go on school transport but go on service buses? And finally, can the Cabinet Secretary tell us when you'll give local councils the powers set out in the Transport Bill to run their own bus services, benefit of the community, and stop some of these bus routes being cut that we're seeing at present?
Michael Matheson.
President Officer, I'm grateful to the questions from Colin Smith. Of course, it would be inaccurate to reflect the suggestion that in some way the Scottish Government has not increased its funding into active travel. He'll be aware that in this year's financial budget, we are providing record levels of funding for active travel, over £100 million, and alongside that, we have provided an additional £15 million directly to local authorities, which provides them with, in total, around £23.5 million for active travel initiatives on their own, alongside the additional funding which the Scottish Government's making available for active travel infrastructure. Minister Smith made reference specifically to the funding which I'm announcing today. This will not be funding which will be provided to bus operators. This is funding for bus prioritisation, which will be provided to local authorities in order to put the infrastructure arrangements in place in the areas that they see as being key, helping to improve bus connectivity, particularly in areas where traffic congestion can have an impact on the quality and reliability of services. The funding which I've announced of an additional £10 million for rapid deployment of bus prioritisation is specifically for local authorities to put these arrangements in place. That will be driven by the local view. So it will be local authorities that will determine what is the best way in which for that resource to be deployed within their local area. What I can say from the engagement we've been having with COSLA and some of our local authorities today, they already have significant plans around how they could improve bus prioritisation. And this will assist people who are making use of bus to have more reliable services and to tackle issues around congestion that can have an impact on services. And on his final point in regard to issues around the new Transport Act, the member will be well aware of the very significant demands which have been placed upon local authority staff in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. As it has been the case in government, we've had to pivot our resources towards dealing with the pandemic. Local authorities have had to do the same, and the measures which we are taking forward are policies which we are working in partnership with them in order to try and manage the demand on their time. At the present moment, local authorities are not demanding that they have the right to be able to run bus services given the other competing demands which they are facing. But I've got no doubt that will be an issue that can be revisited as we move forward and when local authorities have got better capacity to deal with some of these issues.
We'll now move on to the open questions. Can I say this is becoming very difficult because of the sound issues? So could I request that members ask short questions and short answers, and I'm sure that the Cabinet Secretary would be willing to follow up in writing to give more information. Emma Harper, followed by Gordon Lyndhurst.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on his view of the compliance with compulsory face coverings on public transport and how public transport capacity compares now compared to pre-COVID levels, especially in my South Scotland region?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, when we introduced the mandatory provision for face coverings on public transport in Scotland back on the 22nd of June, compliance levels were initially around 10% at the start. We now see compliance levels which are very often up at 90% and in some cases beyond that. There are some variations at times, and where there are variations that demonstrate a lack of adherence to the provision, operators are taking proactive action in order to address that. And on Ms Harper's second point, capacity on our rail network is at 60% and will further increase early in August ahead of the schools returning, which provides about 70% of seating capacity. And on bus, operators are now up to 70, in some cases up to 90% of their normal service provision, with most of them expecting to be up to 100% service provision by the beginning of August.
Gordon Lyndhurst, followed by George Adam.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, it would appear from your statement that the full amount of Barnett consequentials coming to the Scottish Government, which amount to £448 million as a result of UK Government spending on transport, will not be spent on the transport sector in Scotland. Can you first of all confirm that that is the case, and perhaps if this Cabinet Secretary could also explain why the spending is not being made here in Scotland?
Presiding Officer, we continue to be in dialogue with the UK Government in order to get clarity on the Barnett consequentials. There are a number of areas where my colleague Kate Forbes has put this issue with the Treasury because they have provided a lack of clarity on areas where specific Barnett consequentials will be provided, including in Scotland on transport. For example, the over £1 billion that was provided for Transport for London, as yet the Treasury have not clarified whether there will be Barnett consequentials for Scotland from that funding. So I can assure the member that we are continuing to pursue with the UK Government clarity around what Barnett consequentials on transport are being provided, because to date the Treasury have not provided us with full transparency on that detail.
George Adam, followed by Pauline Neal.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that there should be engagement with charities such as the RNIB, who are currently promoting coronavirus courtesy code, to ensure that disabled people are not disadvantaged by changes to street layouts which encourage active travel?
Michael Matheson.
Deputy Presiding Officer, Mr Adam raises an important issue. The RNIB policy document has been shared with our officials in Transport Scotland and also with the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland, who provided bespoke specific guidance for local authorities around the Spaces for People initiative. We continue to engage with third sector organisations such as the RNIB to address any issues of concerns which they may have, and to make sure that local authorities, when they're introducing any new active travel infrastructure through the Spaces for People initiative, that they are taking full account of the accessibility needs of those who may have disabilities, including those who may have visual or partial visual sight problems.
Pauline McNeill, followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Presiding Officer, Unite the Union told a cross-party group of MSPs yesterday that there was an impending disaster in the aviation industry if the Scottish Government do not have a short to medium plan to help it. The job cuts are on a scale never seen before. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm to me that he will meet urgently with the unions Unite and GMB and any other unions that are relevant? Will the Cabinet Secretary address something which he hasn't in the statement today, which is a plan to save our airports, a sector-specific plan to make sure that we save all of Scotland's airports?
Michael Matheson.
Paul McNeill raises what is a very important issue, and is one which is well recognised by both myself and the wider Scottish Government, and there's already been extensive discussion with the aviation sector around some of the challenges which they are facing. The particular difficulties which we face in the aviation sector in Scotland are linked to the global downturn in aviation, which is affecting the sector right across the whole of the globe. Therefore, any action which we take here in Scotland has got to be focused on the areas where we are able to influence some form of change. That's why the work which we are now taking forward around looking at developing a recovery plan for the aviation sector has a particular focus on identifying routes that can be re-established in order to increase capacity within the Scottish aviation sector going forward. And that work will include involving those within the trade union sector, and officials have already had direct engagement with them, and ministers will be engaging with them as we go forward in developing that recovery plan.
Stuart Stevenson, followed by John Finney.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his announcement of changes to the bus emissions abatement retrofit scheme, which I very much welcome. Looking to the longer term and the green recovery that we want to have, will hydrogen have a long-term future as part of the fuel for buses, lorries, trains and ferries?
Michael Matheson. Michael Matheson.
Deputy Presiding Officer, the opportunity for hydrogen to be used within the bus industry is one which has already been tested out in the north east of Scotland, in Aberdeen and also in Dundee through a Scottish Government supported initiative. We're also working to develop a hydrogen accelerator in partnership with the academia and industry in Scotland, and we'll set out more details of that in the weeks ahead. Alongside that, the member will also be aware of our recent announcement of the Energy Transition Plan, which we are supporting in the north east of Scotland, investing an additional £62 million in a range of initiatives to support the transition from a hydrocarbon-based economy in the north east of Scotland to one which is based on sustainable new technologies. And within that, there is a specific level of funding being provided for hydrogen. So I can assure the member that the possibility of using hydrogen to a greater extent, particularly in the heavy road industry, including in haulage and in bus, is an area that we are continuing to give active support, and will continue to work with partners in the years ahead to develop technology in this area.
Finney, followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary lightly talks of the success of the Spaces for People scheme and announces an additional £3.4 million from the active travel budget. He also advises he's considering options to repurpose active travel money. Once again, the existing active travel budget is to be raided. Can the Cabinet Secretary please outline whether sums of money will be repurposed from the massive roads budget to more sustainable modes of transport?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, to reassure the member, and I'm sure I've made this point in Parliament before when it's been raised with me, is that the money which has been used for Spaces for People and through the active travel budget is funding which cannot be spent in this financial year because of the pandemic and the challenges which it has presented. Therefore, we're utilising the money in a way which is to try and help to support local authorities and the public to use active travel as an option during the pandemic. But I can assure the member that the Scottish Government's commitment to continuing and sustaining record investment in active travel remains our commitment, and it will be that will remain our commitment as we go forward. I can also assure them that we are also deploying any underspend in capital spending programmes, such as in road building, to other areas where it can be better deployed. But he should be assured of our long-standing and ongoing commitment to making sure we best utilise the record investment we are putting into active travel.
I'm going to let the session run on a wee bit because I'm quite anxious that the remaining 4 members get in, but could I ask them as succinct as possible, please? And it's Beatrice Wishart, followed by Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Island holiday accommodation providers have been advised that if a visitor is suspected to have come into contact with COVID while staying with them, then the visitor should return home to isolate, but avoiding the use of public transport. How has this travel plan been island-proofed, and has the Cabinet Secretary had any conversations with ferry and air travel operators in the islands about what exactly the process would be for those who need to get home from Shetland to isolate?
Michael Matheson.
Deputy Presiding Officer, the clinical advice is that for anyone who's in an island that is diagnosed as having COVID-19 or suspects that they may have COVID-19 is that they should not make use of public transit. It's the case in islands and it is the case in the mainland area too. What I can say to the member is that for any individual who undergoes a test that is then confirmed as having COVID-19, as it is set out in the guidance that's been issued by the Scottish Government, is that they should take the advice of the health professionals who advise them on what actions they should then take. Therefore, it may be a case that they have to remain within the accommodation which they're renting on islands, or that alternative accommodation will have to be identified. And if that is the case, then the local authority, working in partnership with the health authorities, will seek to try and identify potentially alternative accommodation. But advice and guidance has already been issued on this matter, and it's extremely important that anyone who's travelling to our islands complies with that guidance should they be diagnosed as having COVID-19.
Alistair Allen, followed by Peter Chapman.
Is the Cabinet Secretary able to indicate what can be done to keep ferry capacity in the Western Isles at a level that can continue to cope with the demands of both islanders and tourists over the coming weeks, and to ensure that the CalMac online booking service is able to give an accurate picture of when sailings are and are not full?
Michael Matheson.
Deputy Presiding Officer, as a result of moving to 1 metre physical distancing on our ferry network, capacity has increased significantly en route spread across the right across to Mr Allen's constituency and across the rest of the CHIF's network, and also on the Northern Isles routes too. What I can say to him is that as it stands at the present moment, CalMac have advised us that they presently have capacity on all of our routes at peak times on the busiest days. So there continues to be additional capacity available on the network for the demand which it is experiencing at the present moment, and also with the forward booking that they now have in place. To assist islanders in particular, and also the tourism industry on our islands, the booking system has gone from a 4-week booking slot to being for the extended period of the season, give travellers and islanders greater certainty around being able to book ferry seats. Additionally, I can say to the member that a quantum of tickets on each sailing is being held back by CalMac and Northlink in order to on-day demand that may be experienced, particularly for islanders who may have to leave the island at short notice or return at short notice. There is a quantity of tickets which are being held back on each sailing to try and meet any unexpected demand that may come, particularly from local island residents.
Peter Chapman, followed by Maureen Mort.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome there was some extra support money announced today for bus companies. However, coach companies, which are all about holiday tours and local travel for private groups, have had very little support and have either collapsed already or are close to collapse and desperately need help. Can the Cabinet Secretary give us any hope for these coach companies that there is some support for them?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I recognise the challenges which the coach sector is facing, largely because of the downturn in the tourism industry which it is experiencing. They're able to apply for the wider package of measures which is available for businesses in Scotland who are being adversely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. What I can also say to the member is on the programme which I've announced today, on the Retrofit programme, is that coach operators are able to apply to that fund as well for their vehicles should they feel that is necessary.
And the last, Maureen Mort.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Cabinet Secretary is aware, the announced relaxation in the 2-metre rule for public transport was accompanied by a non-exhaustive list of possible mitigations. Can I ask him how such mitigations are working in practice and how he has worked with stakeholders to put them in place?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, although public transport operators have been given an exception to be able to move from 2 metres to 1 metre, they can only do so once they have completed the necessary risk assessments. And in doing that, also engaging with their staff and the trade unions before they apply any changes to them. Those operators which have taken full risk assessments and carried out that engagement have been able to introduce other mitigation measures. In some cases, it's enhanced cleaning programmes or additional sanitizer being made available, ensuring stronger compliance with face coverings. And for some of them, it's also looking at putting in perspex screens to protect members of their staff. Once these measures have been implemented, they're able then to move to phase 1. So the guidance which we've issued to transport operators is to make sure that they comply with the risk assessment procedure that they must complete prior to moving from 2 metres of physical distancing to 1 metre. And those who we've engaged with to date who have made that change have completed the proper process in completing the necessary risk assessment and engaging with the workforce prior to any changes.
Thank you, everyone. That was a really difficult session. Particular problems sound, not just the Cabinet Secretary, but it seemed to be. So thank you for your forbearance. And that ends the Ministerial Statement on Transport and concludes today's business. This meeting is closed.